Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Chris Garris, and welcome to the Transporter Room. Today, we have a very special guest joining us, Mai. Mai is one of the associate producers for the Seventh Row podcast. Thank you for taking the time to come on the show today. How's your day been?
It's my honor to be here. Absolutely. So far, so good. It's early in Tokyo at the moment, 11 o'clock
Yes.
in the morning.
So, hey, I want to let you know, honestly, that it has been a pleasure getting to know you since I joined the Seventh Rule, and you and the whole group just was always so welcoming to all of us newbies. And even when those first recordings, I really was like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here. And but now it's a totally different vibe, and I finally have gotten used to doing that, which is what helped me, honestly, to be able to do this.
Right,
you
right,
know
right. No, it's a good group of people. It's a very good group of people.
oh, it
Um,
is, it's a great group. I will definitely plug the channel because we have our group stuff, and then when we're done, we all hop onto the Discord server, and then honestly just continue talking about either the episode that we just watched and reviewed, or and then we just move on to life. And
yeah,
just
yeah, from soup to nuts. I mean, we cover all kinds of. It's just a gab session with people that enjoy hanging out with each other. So it's pretty neat.
It is a great group. I enjoyed all of them, and I cannot wait till the day I get to meet you in person, Dave, Faith, just the whole kit and caboodle, which maybe in November. So
It only gets better when it's in person. It's fantastic.
I bet.
I
So
can definitely attest to that.
well, good. So I've been wondering. So I honestly stumbled across the seventh rule originally for myself. How did you find out about it?
Oh, geez. I was in the throes of dealing with a couple of parents who just passed a few years ago, and I was interested in participating. I knew of it because I'd been following along, and I knew that you could pay a certain amount of money each month and join a, a meeting and participate. And I thought, you know what? Maybe a little engagement would be what I need in my life right now. So I tried that once, and that was earlier in the year, and it was fun. And I wanted more. And then I got an email saying, "Would you like to become a sponsor for the following season?" And I thought, I would. So I went ahead with that, and it just snowballed from there.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I really don't know if I was just searching on Patreon or something to that nature. Um and then I was talking with Greg Kenzo one night on one of our discords on another channel, and that's right, he did say, hey, you might want to look into the seventh rule people. And I'm like, okay. And honestly, the rest is history so far. And so it's
No,
been
once it
fun.
starts, yeah, once you're hooked, you're hooked. It's a good group.
It is. And I was so jealous that you, Tierney, and Faith all got to meet up back in, was
That
it
was neat.
November?
No, December. We met up in December in Baltimore. That
December.
was very cool. Offline meetings are wonderful because they really look at the fact that we enjoy each other and we're not limited to just the time for the broadcast recording, and it further confirms the fact that we just enjoy each other's company, and it's really neat. So having met a few of the people, I can attest to the fact that it doesn't ever get old, and it makes the whole thing so much better.
Oh, that's good to know. I'm looking forward to that. I'm hoping in November I get to run into the whole group, and I
Do
mean,
it.
I'm planning on it. So I know with you living in Tokyo,
Yeah.
there's probably not a lot of Star Trek conventions over there or
No,
events.
definitely nothing happening in that regard here. That said, you're surrounded by a very creative environment. If that's what you're after, there's a wealth of creative endeavors going on here, animated, live recording, fan stuff. But Star Trek per se, no. You have to travel for that.
Okay, and so that's actually something I had never thought about until honestly just right this minute. What does the Japanese culture even do? They even think about Star Trek at all, or is it something that's you know in your interactions?
Star Trek hasn't really been translated, and without a bilingual version, it's hard for people to become enthused about it. And so it's never really been. It's not that it hasn't caught on; it hasn't really been introduced because I think there's just so much original media here, characters and shows, things that started when people that are 50 now were when they're in grammar school. It's just a whole. It's a very media rich environment, and I think there's no feeling of we're missing out on anything. Partially because they don't know about it, but in large part because there's so much other good stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that until just now as we were talking, because you're right. There's so much cultural stuff to do in Japan that I mean, I don't want to say they don't need what we have, but again, they don't really need what we have. They have their own.
Yeah, I don't know what it would be like if it were introduced with the ability to, overdubbing voices takes away a lot of what those actors infused into their characters. And so that's an often used style here for other TV shows that are broadcast in Japan and the US. I mean, Amazon has a whole bunch of stuff available, but it's overdubbed. And if you take away the specific characteristics of the delivery of the actors, you're losing a lot of what Star Trek is. And so I think if you asked 10 people, 9 of them at least would say, I don't want to read subtitles. It's a pain in the neck. And I don't think that those 10 people need to be limited to Japan. I think any 10 people anywhere in the world would tell you the same thing. So, do you go with subtitles and that's not going to bring a lot of people in? Or do you go with overdubbing and lose so much of what the actual show is? Um, it's a tough call. So, because those two hills are so insurmountable in so many ways, I think that they've just relied on other things. And there are certain diehard fans that go out and find versions of it, and there are certainly captions available if you want to watch it and read it in English, but you have to be proficient in English for that. So I think a lot of factors come together to make it not what's shown here. Um, there's only a limited amount of time that they can broadcast stuff, and there's just literally so much stuff that's born here that they're like, you know what? So, and I don't have any issue with that at all. I like traveling and I like going to the places to see the people. And it's also Star Trek's very cultural. And the sense of discovery and the history of discovery is different from country to country. So the gut feeling that people who are in their 40s, 50s, or 60s may have about Star Trek is different in part due to the culture in which they grew up. I think that's my. I don't know if that's a hard, fast fact. That's my opinion on it.
Well, I didn't even that makes me think. I'm sitting here as soon as you start talking about dubbing and overdubbing, I'm sitting thinking like I cannot fathom hearing someone else's voice as Kirk or Spock, and
Well, exactly.
especially in the original series with all of his, over, I don't want to say overacting, but how well he emphasized his words and and all of that, and like, oh, it would be nothing against dubbing, but it would be lost.
True. The only ones you could really do it effectively with are the three animated series. Beyond that, nothing would really work because you'd be misrepresenting the actor. I think, and so much of the character is the actor. In my opinion, one of the things I love about Star Trek is the fact that those specific actors create those characters as they have done.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can't fathom, hearing someone else's voice as John Luc Picard. I
No,
just no. I'm sorry, it's
no,
Patrick Stewart.
I agree entirely. No, I agree entirely.
I mean, it'd be like hearing me playing Patrick Stewart. Just not going to happen. Or Worf, just ain't just done. No good. Gotta be clicking or doing the subtitles because that would just
No,
be
I agree.
that would
Yeah,
be
I
hard.
absolutely.
So since you don't have like the conventions over there, have you ever had time to attend any in the United States? I can't remember or not. Or if you've ever attended.
I haven't attended any.
Okay.
For me, Star Trek is less about the actors than it is the message. And so, as conventions are so much about sharing the experience with other fans and interacting with the actors as people, and they are all so warm and generous that people go to those things and absolutely love them and are passionate about it for very good reason. It's just not something. It's not an aspect of the show that I've ever really delved into, to be honest.
Oh, that's fine. And I mean, I've only been now to two conventions so far. I'm definitely looking at one of these days. I will go to STLV because, like you said, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the shows, and but I'm going there also to meet our friends, and it's hard. It's weird to even say this now. The actors are almost secondary in a way now for me.
It's a fantastic environment for a fan because you meet other fans, you meet people who are thinking in a very inclusive as opposed to exclusive way, and it just for so many reasons, as long as you're armed, it's a great environment. But it's just not my particular thing because of the emphasis. The emphasis shifts from the message to the people, and I watch the show more for the messages. So.
Well, and that leads me to honestly, what drew you into Star Trek, the series and all that stuff originally?
She was well, as a 4-year-old, I was as a 4-year-old, I was sitting there. My dad would flip through the channels, and sometimes it would land on Star Trek, and I was very intrigued by space because up through 1969, when I was 4, it became a I turned 5 later in 1969, and so throughout that year, there was so much NASA stuff going on, and then in '69, when the lunar landing occurred, I was sitting there on my mom's lap watching this, and I watched it a few days before the blast off, the countdown, blast off, and this thing shuddering up into the sky, and then flying weightless and landing, and this famous lines being uttered, and then watching the parachute drop the lunar module back. No, not the whole lunar module, actually. What, capsule, yeah, back into the ocean, and then the ship picking them up and putting them in their little van and driving off for screening. That whole thing just for a little kid, I felt, wow, we're doing this. This is real, and it was enthralling. And you have Star Trek going on, and then a couple years later, the reruns start, and I really was able to say, that's what we're talking about here. And so that the hook was the NASA program, and the hook was the early exposure to the first series, and this character of Spock who was a very confident, competent, quiet, very specific with his words person, and that's how I was when I was a kid too. And I really related to that personality type, and to see that it was not only okay, but it was viewed in many ways as a leadership role. I thought that plus the space stuff and the whole itchy feet to go see the world thing, even from a young age, I was like, all right, that's it, I'm in. And it just really sort of spun out of control from there, so to speak.
Well, yeah, and if you think about all the people since the original series till today that have, you know, become scientists and gone into work for I mean, there's not. I mean, there's probably. I'm just gonna make up a number, but I would say at least 60 to 70% of every employee that works at any of the NASA centers or even in aerospace in general has probably watched Star Trek and said, "Yes, that's what I want to go do."
It's so inspirational on so many levels. If you are inclined towards any of the sciences, absolutely. If you're inclined towards working with people and seeing people as one whole, if you're inclined towards future endeavors, for so many reasons, it's very inspirational, and it has been inspirational to a lot of people. I agree.
Oh yeah. And I mean, and you also have to think about like in the original series, which it started all of this with just and it has progressed, all the social issues that Trek has addressed. And I mean, obviously, I did not watch the original series until I'm honestly just really now starting to watch it. But I'd always heard about the very the the good, those episodes that just struck a chord with everybody. Especially I think one of the biggest one was the kiss between Uhura and Kirk, and then the other one, I think, like it was the one with that the species that was split and had the black and the white. And I'd say, because again, I'm still learning TOS. I don't know all those their names, but you have to think about how much, especially in the late 60s, how much that influenced the society at that time.
It absolutely did, and I think that the curious thing about Star Trek in the original series and the issues that it looked at, those race issues or the good versus evil dichotomy, and how people were treated depending on their skin color. I think what Star Trek did, rather than preaching, rather than coming up with a message and saying we need to tell people about this, we need to go full on, science book thumping and get people involved. What it did was it said, "Look in this mirror. This is what we see of you today." And then it somehow into that, but couldn't we do better? And that was the real hook. I think, couldn't we do better? And it didn't ask anything of anybody other than to just look at themselves and to reflect. And that reflection showed an awful lot to a lot of people. And it was a time, you got to bear in mind that this is the 60s. I grew up in Berkeley in the 60s, and there was a lot of change happening. The country was going through a lot of change, societally, politically. There was just a whole lot going on. So it was a very rich environment for growth. And many people availed themselves of that and saw in Star Trek this mirror, and then they reflected on themselves. And they said, we can do better. And you see people from the original show that went on throughout their lives, and Nichelle Nichols and Leonard Nimoy and the various. I look at George Takei today. I think that there was a true commitment to that. Let's do better, sort of thing.
Well, and also, yeah, exactly. And I remember on when they were, a lot of the different podcasts and social media that I'm on, when they were celebrating, uh, well, Nichelle Nichols, her birthday, and but then also on MLK, I scrolled across something and it had her, the interview she was doing, and it's just when she was talking about, you know, when Dr. Martin Luther King,
Yeah.
they ran into each other, or somehow they were together.
Well,
Yeah, and she's like, he's talking to me,
yeah.
and she felt
We
that
got to
should
be
have been.
there.
She totally felt
Yeah.
it should have been the opposite way, and he's like, no, because she wanted to leave the show, and
Yeah. You need to be there for us. And I think that that's incredible. The tie-in to society was incredible. Uh, TNG, which came along a number of years later, really was at that time a modern version of what TOS was, and it sought to do the same thing in terms of holding up a mirror and saying, think about this a second, and can we do better? Is there anything we can learn from this? And I think that that was a large part of what TNG sought to do. It just made it more relevant to the people in the 90s. And yeah, so that was, I think, those two shows both took very much the same approach. And then it moved on from there to DS9, where it was more storytelling and using that vehicle in the same way. But it used a story, and it used relationships, ongoing, continuing relationships, in a way to create that same kind of environment in which the show could say, how does this work? Is this a good thing? Was that a bad decision? A good decision? Should we do something differently? And then, the prequel of Enterprise coming out shortly thereafter. And, it was those four shows really did it, you know? And so that was a real solid package from the late 60s through till the early 2000s. That was a real solid package.
and it was, and as I can't remember if you were on the FFA, but I remember when we were doing the review for, excuse me, the host
Yes.
with, and I may have already said this on some other channels, but I remember watching it, and I was preparing for it, and it was not until my third watch of it at the
Right.
very end, and it's out there, when I realized what Dr. Crusher was trying to say when
Yes.
when if when he came back out when the host came out, sorry, the symbiont came back out in the female host, and
That's it. That's it.
it totally caught her off guard. And I just remember sitting here watching it, trying to make it. I was like, and it was like, boom.
Well, it's like any great piece of art or any piece of sculpture that you might view. You can go on a school trip when you're 15 and see it, and then you can go back at the age of 30 or the age of 50 and see it. And the thing itself hasn't changed, even a tiny bit. What's changed is you. And I think that that for me is one of the great things about Star Trek making it as timeless as it is that the messages are there. Whether you can understand them, whether you can relate to them specifically or not. You're not so much peeling layers back off of an onion as you are perceiving things differently based on your own experience or your own level of understanding of the world. And that I think is the beauty of it because it's just there and you can watch it 3 times in your life and see or understand 3 different things entirely.
Oh, exactly. And like I said, I mean, I think I even said in our review, I remember watching that when it first came out, right over my head.
Oh yeah, so much of that stuff was like that, and it was only on, it was on reflection. I saw TNG as a 30-something-year-old, and so I was watching that, and I was comparing it to TOS the entire time. And my initial reaction, my first watching of it, I was like, wait a second. And then I thought, hang on a second, let's just get rid of those biases and let's look at what they're putting out there because it is a valid Star Trek show, as all of them are, really. That's being very generous because I don't like the more recent ones, but I think that I think that uh, TNG on a second viewing gave me exponentially more than it did on its first viewing, and that wasn't so much because of what the show was doing, so much as how I was looking at it, and that was what it boils down to.
Well, and I was 11 when TNG came out, so yeah, I was watching it for the action and the spaceships and all that stuff, and so yeah, I'm actually that's one of the beauties of doing what I'm doing all this is it I have to go back and review stuff and watch it, and you just learn, and you're like, oh, that's what they were trying to say, and and all they could say back at those times.
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, look at the fact Picard. Here's this Shakespearean actor, very strong accent, compared to Kirk, who's got a very North American accent and is very expressive. And I think one of the things that the show was doing with that was saying, stop looking at the actor, listen to what they're saying, and it became quickly apparent to me that that was equally true of Data versus Spock, or quickly true of Beverly compared to Bones. There was a lot of stop looking at the details and look at the bigger picture sort of thing. And that's always what it's been about for me. And that's why I say that I like the messages more than the actual fan side of things.
And yeah, exactly. And that's why, for me personally, when it comes to like the series, I know it's hard to say, everyone says what's your favorite and so on and so on. I know that's such a loaded question because, usually they're all pretty good. But like when I was talking to TJ one night, I mean, he's like, he gave me his top three, and it always seems to change. And mine usually can do the same. But for me, my top one, and it didn't used to be that, but it's always is now has been Enterprise because I just loved. For me, I just loved getting to see how we're watching humanity take our first steps,
Oh yeah,
and also just Scott
absolutely.
Bakula.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot of that stuff. My initial favorite of everything was Spock, not the show, but Spock.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until much later in life that I realized how much I appreciated what Nichelle Nichols had done. And I thought about why didn't I get that earlier? And well, I was framing things in the terms that I was, this white kid growing up in America. It was not something that was easy for me to understand, and it took a lot of growing up to realize that there was a heck of a lot more there. And so going on from that, the shows, each of the shows has had a great deal of appeal for different reasons. I particularly like Deep Space Nine's approach to I'm a big fan of reading, and I like the way that they tell a story that goes and goes and goes. And Ira's work on that was just incredible. Um, I told him that I thought that his writing was a modern version of what J.R.R. Tolkien had done with Lord of the Rings, and he was happy about that. But I feel, yeah, I feel that that appeals to me because of its family values. Because at that point, I was a parent and I was trying to figure out how to deal with my own children, and a lot of that was being expressed there, friends, and in a situation that you're not really moving away from all the time, but you're having to look inwards, and that's how I see DS9. Enterprise, I loved as a prequel. I thought it was well done. I thought it didn't overstep its bounds. It didn't try to be something not Star Trek. It said, we are going to fill in some of those blanks, like how did the Klingons get from here to there, sort of thing. And I feel like there was just a great deal of very Star Trekky stuff in through it through Enterprise, and after that, it became much more a function of what society becomes. Think about it, there were no cell phones, there were no TikTok videos, there were no YouTube videos, and by the time the 2010s and the 2020s come along, we do have those things. And so entertainment came to the fore, whereas before it was less about entertainment, although that was there, and it was more consistently keeping this theme of, can we do better? Let's hold this mirror up and look at ourselves through these scenes that we're watching on this show. And that was revelatory for a lot of people, but later on it became more about entertainment. And so it attracts fans that are 7, it attracts fans that are 70 for very good reason. It's like going to the supermarket. There's something for everybody there. Absolutely.
And and you get to watch, you know, Scott Bakula's character, Captain Archer. I mean, he grows so much in those 4 seasons, from the beginning to the end, and he's literally, I hate to say it, he's having to learn and taking and getting hit at the same time, and he's got to Paul over here like, well, I don't, they were so tired of having the Vulcans tell him, well, you really probably shouldn't do that. You should do like what we do. And as humans, in our nature, we don't want to be told what to do.
No, I agree. That the characters were that show of all of them had more eye candy in the character actors than any other show. And so the first thing that hits you is like, wow, look at that cast. But you quickly go into the stories, and you quickly go into, if you were that person, how would you have reacted? And it's asking you to think right the way through, and that's an extraordinary aspect of it.
It is. And like one of my favorite episodes of that series was Dear Doctor, when he is literally having to decide, to do they stay and play God? And that's not what they were there for. And T'Pol points out that the Vulcans have been on Earth for 100 years since they came. And oh man, and I'd still love his line, until someone gives us a directive of what to do and not to do, I have to be the one to make those decisions. And it is a very hard decision for him to make. And of course, he does the right thing, but you could just tell it, at his core, it ate at him and ate at him, because he wanted to help these people, but uh,
Well, this is it. There was so much ability for that show and the ones that preceded it to get to know the characters in a way that it's easy for you to see parts of yourself in them, or wonder what you would have been like walking a mile in their shoes. And that was, yeah, absolutely all of that. All of that. Every single time I watch it, the hundreds of rewatches of the shows, every single time that gets me. And I think that's been the beauty of the whole thing. It's saying, look, what do you think? It's been an a teacher that elicits is always been my favorite kind of teacher, rather than a teacher that just gives information to be memorized.
I know. Well, and talking about DS9, I'm actually probably
Yeah.
about to buy my next piece of artwork, or a print from Jenny,
Yes.
of In the Pale Moonlight, because
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. No, that's a beautiful piece.
That's a beautiful piece and a beautiful episode. I
Oh
just
yeah,
I, I,
there's so much there. It's so rich. And having that work of art on your wall and having quiet moments and sitting there and thinking about it and reflecting. I love the show, the entertainment, but dig, that's a really cool message right there. That's a really cool way to think about things there. And it's that piece of art gives you so much more than just being decorative. It allows you to lose yourself in the scene and lose yourself in what you felt then and how you and take your thoughts further. I absolutely adore that about those types of pieces of art where you're not limited to just hanging it there and having it be there. It comes alive for you.
well, and if you've seen the episode, you're going to look back at that picture and be like, "Yeah, I remember what Avery did," and that just, and I think I'm going to have to ask Ciroc if we ever have enough chit chat time to ask him what it was. I don't know if he was on set that day, but I'd love to know what it was like on the set the day that he did that monologue and that his speech. I can imagine. And just in my mind, I'm sitting here thinking like you could have heard a pin drop after he was done.
Well, it's interesting. I've listened to a lot of monologues for a lot and a lot of from a lot of the actors and other actors and other shows as well. And if I got to guess that if I were a fellow member of the cast watching somebody do that, I would have been inspired by their ability to perform. But I think I probably would have been more inspired by the person making that come alive. And afterwards, looking at that person with a wow, I'm really glad to walk this planet right at the same time you are, because there's so much incredibly powerful personality that comes through. And it goes back to your original question: why do you go to the conventions, or do you go to conventions? And I think the powerful personalities that are tied to this core concept of inclusivity, that are seen in the actors is incredible. I mean, Sirach is a perfect example of somebody who is living and breathing and everything else. His truth is in part made up by his experience uh, performing in the show, living the life that he's led. And I think that at his age, he comes across as somebody who could be 500 years old. He's learned so much through the people he's interacted with. He's a very incredibly old soul who's wise beyond his years, but has this boyish charm when he talks to you. So there's just a very kind of really welcoming aspect to the interactions with the actors. Denise Crosby is another one. I really relate to her. I love talking to her, and I think that when she watched uh, the other actors, these incredibly powerful actors doing their thing, she probably felt inspired in the same way. And she's all of her lived experiences and her truth. Wow, just somebody that you feel darn glad to spend some time with. So
Well, and I loved her talking about and about redemption part 2 when she actually got to basically be at the same level as Patrick Stewart when they're in the ready room, and she's basically talking him down or telling him, and her comments about that was like she just had so much fun getting to do that scene. And I told her as well. I said, Denise, I felt like you were on the same level as Stuart Patrick that day in your acting abilities and with what you were saying, because usually he's the one who's got the power, or his character, I mean, and they were on equal footing.
yeah, she was given a role equal to her. What she should have had that kind of role from day one, and it took them a very long time to figure that out. And it was unfortunate because she's such an incredible, powerful actor in the way she emotes. And yeah, I would call her a hero for that role. That role was a true hero, and nothing less. That's one of the most moving episodes of the entire show for me.
So I was actually, so if of all the shows, and you may not be able to pick one, but do you have an episode that just resonates with you? I obviously I have a few, but
it's a good question. I see the episodes as vehicles for the messages that they're doing, and oftentimes they repeat messages or look at it from different perspective. And I think that the episodes that hit me the hardest are the ones that ask the questions most directly, or really hold that mirror right up in your face and say, "Look, you can't look away. Look." And that's those are the ones. So it's a list of several episodes, if I'm being honest. And so I particularly like episodes relating to equality. And, you know, every series has those episodes, but equality for me, obviously, is a big issue, especially in the modern culture that we're, culture, hell, that we're living in the US at the moment. I think that equality for me is important. But that's really an understatement. So any of the episodes that look at equality, looking at self-discovery, looking at growth, looking at acceptance, yeah. But the one monologue that resonates with me probably most of all is Denise's when she speaks as a hologram from the thing after she's been killed, and when she made the speech about death is just changing of states, and you exist in the mind, and you're always there, and as such there is no death. And when my parents died, very close together, I used part of that actually in my mom's eulogy, and I feel that it's a really good thought, and it was delivered so long before any of that happened in my life, that and the fact that it stuck with me, and the fact that it became part of what I wanted to say that day, it really resonates with me. But any of the episodes about equality, probably more than anything else.
Well, and I was, thinking about an episode that we watched, and it was probably the one that we had the most people ever join since I've been a member. And it never hit, it didn't hit, it hit home after I finally watched it, which was Half a Life.
Yes.
Oh,
Wow.
oh my
Watch. I mean,
God.
MASH was one of my favorite shows forever. It has been one of my favorite shows forever because in these 30-minute laugh track enhanced shows, it really did a lot. And David Ogden Stiers is wow. And the statements that were made, and the change that came about through understanding that uh, in in um, uh, in everybody's eyes. I think everybody involved really changed their perceptions. And that last scene on the transporter pad was, oh my gosh, that's extraordinary.
Yeah, it hit home for me because, I don't, mother only passed away about 3 years ago now. And I'm like, no, I mean, no, like, no, I'd rather her be here and deal with the other issues. Yeah, it was yeah, that hits you right here, you
Well, it
know?
does because a lot of us are at that point in our lives where we see it coming, or we've recently been caregivers, or we recall what it's like, and we're helping other people who are now becoming caregivers. And that episode spoke to all of those phases of our life, and it was just extraordinary.
Oh, God, it is. It was. I'm not gonna. All right, get a little bit more upbeat here, which everything we've been discussing is exactly right. It's phenomenal, and that's what the whole series is. But I just, is there an alien species that that you like the most or intrigued you the most during the shows?
I've got to say the Vulcans. I think that dealing with a somewhat hectic life as a child, the ability to escape to serenity by being logical was and has been throughout my entire life a great way of doing things. And so this focusing, when you put your fingers together and you think about things, or when you go for a bit of solitude, whether it's just simple breathing meditation, or you realize that there's a different way to do things rather than the screaming that's going on around you. I feel that the Vulcans really gave me more of an early life example of what I wanted to be like. And then later on throughout my life, it stuck with me. And yeah, I'd say the Vulcans probably inspired me more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, they honestly were probably a lot of people's number one because it shows us what we can do. Hopefully, as a society, if we look at stuff logically, which sadly doesn't happen all the time, but if we did, you know, we might not have some of the issues that we have today. Um, and that's one thing about the whole franchise and what Gene wanted to do was to, you know, help us to become more open to diversity.
The Vulcans. One of the big things with the Vulcans is the first time I saw Vulcan ships, those big round things firing weapons, I was aghast because up until that point, the Vulcans, although capable of incredible physical feats, were relatively nonviolent. Spock would zap somebody with a pinch on his shoulder, and the guy'd collapse. Okay, that was it. That was like hugging somebody when they're yelling at you and saying you need more love in your life. And I just felt like there was this nonviolence aspect to the Vulcans that spoke of so much incredible power and the right way to use power. That struck because for whatever was going on in our lives, sometimes people see a lot of violence, and when you can see that, you're just like, wow, that's pretty powerful.
Well, yeah, he did everything he could to be nonviolent, and the whole race did. In all honesty, um, I mean, it's funny. It's not. It has nothing to do with the violence, but I love that scene. I think it was the first. It was the very first episode of Enterprise when they're eating dinner in the captain's mess. It's Trip, Paul, and Captain, and she's using her knife to cut a breadstick, and Trip's like, you're not going to be able to do that. And she takes her time and boom, she does it. And he basically says, if you put your mind to something, you can make it happen.
Yeah, it was very much about brain over brawn with that species. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, so, okay, here's a fun question.
Yep.
What technology do you wish we had today from Star Trek?
Wow, that's a great question. I think that my background as a full-time hippie in the 60s in Berkeley uh, has got to guide me on this. And that is, if we're going to solve problems that we see in the world today, it's not going to come through the ability to pop over to Japan for sushi or pop over to England for mushy peas or whatever it happens to be with a transporter. It's not going to be space travel, which takes us to places that we may or may not be ready to visit. It's gonna be the replicator, which allows us to feed people, which allows us to house people, which allows us to clothe people. I look at the disastrous result of what's going on around the world today, and so much of it is about gaining territory or establishing territory for the ability to live. And immigration issues in the US are so much based on the fact that the people that have immigrated often felt that the grass was greener. And that meant actually eating, that meant actually having a future. And I think that if we had a replicator, we could solve so many issues. And once those issues were solved, we may actually grow enough as a people to deserve to travel to the far stars. But I think it all starts with making sure that everybody's on equal footing, that everybody has the basic ability to hit that first level of Maslow's pyramid and feed themselves, feed their kids, and not worry about whether or not they've got a place to stay that night, and not whether they've got clothes that are warm enough for the winter. I this to me, that's the biggest thing is the replicator.
And I have to agree now. After the first person I interviewed, well, second person I interviewed was Katie Nicolau. And I asked her
Oh,
that same question.
what a star!
And she said replicator. And at first, it caught me, I'll be honest, it caught me off guard because I would think, again, transporter, warp speed, all that stuff.
Right,
But
right.
she gave that basically that same answer. She said, if we had a replicator, we could end world hunger.
She's again another one of those really wise old souls in a very young person's body. I respect the heck out of that lady.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
incredible.
She's incredible. We could have talked for 2 hours probably when we were doing our interview without a problem, but we were on time. We were keeping it, short and to the point. But yeah, when she said that, I again, I was thinking the convenience factor of everything. And but then it was funny because after we said that, I literally was able to again take the series and tie that back into an episode of Star Trek, which was was caretaker for Voyager, like the Kazon when Voyager beams down all that water, and again another one of those. It's another one of those things you watch it. Oh my God, 30 years. Oh, 30 years. 30 years later, and you're like, ah, yeah, you just give them replicator tech, and that's why they wanted it so badly to steal it because it would have helped. It would have helped their societies. Now, obviously, you might want to program it not so it can't make weapons, but still, oh yeah, yours and her answer, and everybody has said replicator. I totally understand because you can feed people, clothe people, potentially, make medicines. And it's just, yeah. When she said that, the first
All
person that
right.
said
So
that.
here's a question for you.
Okay.
Let's
I'll
turn
see
the
if I can
tables
answer it.
around. What do you think of the Prime Directive as a policy?
So I have to say I have a love hate with it because I understand why we have it. I understand why they have it. You do not need to be interfering with cultures that are not ready because every not every episode, but most of the time that Kirk, Picard, or Archer, or who, oh, Archer didn't have a prime direct, but still, every time you interfere with a civilization or a race that is not at the same maturity level as you actually do more damage. Now, I also feel like there have been those times where it was worth breaking it because you really, really, if they were even as close to the same level as you, the amount of damage might not be as bad. And it was worth it. So I agree with the prime directive, but I also see that there are times when you need to break it.
Yeah, I think I understand exactly what you're saying. For me, it goes back to what your question was about which technology and my answer about the replicator, because I think about my children, and although they couldn't read, I taught them to read. And once I taught them to read, I could give them books and they could enjoy things beyond things they'd ever imagined. So, is the philosophy best to let the children read the book once they figured out how to do it, or is it better to teach them how to read the book? And I feel that the Prime Directive fails us in that key respect. If we spend more time teaching, we can do better things. Now, the problem with teaching is you may include bias in that, and that's been a big separation of religion and state in the U.S. For example. There've been a lot of the bias creeps in. There's no doubt, and also the point that's very valid that you make is if you give somebody something that allows them to shoot other people, they may shoot other people without understanding the value of life because they haven't evolved to that point yet. So there's pluses and there's minuses. But if you gave somebody a replicator who was not warp technology capable, and they were suddenly able to feed and clothe themselves while simultaneously being able to replicate a gun or poison or drugs, they have the potential to devolve as a society. They have the potential to evolve as a society. I think that at some point, much like with children, we have to place our faith in them after we've provided them with a framework of values and say, okay, you've got reference points all around you. What are you going to do with it? So, yeah, the question of what technology and the prime directive, to me, this is why I asked the question. They seem to go hand in hand. And yes, the replicator is a great thing, but is it something that you would give only to people that had achieved a certain level? Or would you give it to people, or would you teach people how to use it beneficially for their society? These are the questions that I struggle with Star Trek today.
Yeah, and that's a hard one because I'm sitting here thinking about that. You could give it to them and you could teach them how to use it,
Sure.
but you
They could
know,
replicate a gun.
they can
Bang,
replicate a
bang.
gun. They could do that. Or if they don't have, oh, listen, and a lot of the times they come back to, I'll give you this advanced technology, but then when it breaks, do you know
Yeah.
how to fix it? So that almost goes back to that old, saying of you give a man a fish and he eats for a day, but if you teach him how to fish, he eats for a
It's forever.
lifetime. And
Yeah.
so I think and but see this then good debate here. It now falls back to what Paul said in that episode of, okay, do you want to be here forever,
Yeah.
teaching these people how to use this device, how not to blow themselves up with it in all, I mean, just think about,
Yeah.
I mean, you can just think about if you took a replicator out to the, in the backwoods of Australia and gave it to the, was it the Aborigines? Is that what it is?
Hmm.
It said,
Hmm.
here, and just, here's how you do it, do it about what, first off, they might think that is magic, you know, but that's a good idea. You give it to someone that, but again, now you have now committed yourself that I'm going to have to be there for a long time to help them potentially
You,
be there for a long
you've
time.
made, if you're
I
the
think.
giver of something, you've made a value judgment that that person is better off with that thing than without that thing.
Yeah.
And that's really the philosophical argument that goes, that could go on forever.
Yeah.
And the prime directive seeks to make it a very dichotomous sort of relationship. I don't believe that's the case.
Yeah.
I believe that it's a multifaceted question and very, very society or individual or culture specific. And
Hmm.
as you've noted, it's just an ongoing thing. You get as many permutations as you do people or
Yeah, you
cultures.
do.
And
Yeah. I
but I
mean,
think that the prime directive and the technology that's available has always seemed to me to be this weird sort of infinite loop that we can't escape from in terms of what should we do. And
well, it
that's I
is.
think it's so Star Trek's asking you, what do you think? Where
And
would you go
that's
with that? And I love that aspect of it. The messages,
exactly.
the question, the holding up that mirror and saying, "What do you
Hmm.
think?" Really
Well,
cool.
and if you think about almost every episode that they have had to break the prime directive, it
Yeah,
generally revolves around technology.
it does. And helping people, and the punishments are always laid out, and it's they try and make it black and white, and it's not.
It's not.
It's
It's all
so
gray.
many shades there. It's a
Yeah.
prism of colors. In modern parlance, it's a spectrum of decisions,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that it's a good one. It's a good one.
It
Good
is.
conversation. No, advocating perspective of if they're your potential friend, or if they're already your friend, or if, yeah, they're different, but isn't that cool? Those kinds of thinking processes are where we need to go, I
Mm-hmm.
think, because it's a whole lot harder to be mean to somebody that you like, and it's a whole lot easier to be helpful to somebody that you care about.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we can move in that direction, even if it's on a metropolitan level, state level, federal level,
Mm-hmm.
international level, there's a lot of growth that humanity has got to undergo before we approach anything even remotely resembling unity.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's, I think, the big thing. I mean, you never hear about anybody being called anything other than an Earthling or a Vulcan or whatever. They group people by planet,
Mm-hmm.
not by country and state, and then we still talk about people by state and race and gender, and it's just so many divisions that just need to be
Mm-hmm.
scrubbed out. We need to blur those lines and unify,
Yep.
and then we can sort of head in the direction that I think that is envisioned by the show.
I agree. Well, and on that note, I am going to say thank you for being on here today and this evening,
Thank you.
or evening for me, afternoon for you by now. And it
Lunchtime.
has, oh, lunch. Hey, perfect. We're, I'll let you get done for lunch. So hopefully you have something yummy to eat. And, but yeah, I appreciate you doing this and I will talk to you later, Mai. You have a good day.
Thank you so much, Chris. Ciao. Bye bye.
Thank you for watching The Transporter Room. For just $5 per month, enjoy ad-free access to this episode and all previous ones, plus exclusive bonus content. Sign up now on Patreon.